guys, I'm still at it. I hope your appetite for philosophy and biography and history is very large, because I'm fascinated by Aristotle's life. I think, well, I'm in the mood to learn and find out. I never say that enough. Maybe I should be corny and use my channel name and have a catchphrase. But no, I don't think I should. It might be this might be just a waste of time. You guys might not enjoy it. I haven't really listened back to it, but I just finished recording my episode on the great-souled human. From this book that I'm sure you guys will be, all you returning viewers, will be very familiar with by the time I finish it in 2020. I think the book is fascinating, and it's piqued my interest about Aristotle and what he... There's just a gang of little kids riding by on one of those hoverboards, and I thought they were just floating on their magic carpet. I had to do a double take. But anyways, I'm still sick. As sick as I was 30 minutes ago. Although for you it might be a couple days, might even be a week. Or I might put them out at the same time. I don't know. But I hope you guys don't mind this too much. My voice is very French whispery, but at the same time it does sound kind of congested. So if you guys think I should just go back and cover this material with a less congested sounding voice, let me know. But anyways, I really have a Aristotelian bug up my butthole right now, so I don't know if you can say that phrase in a positive light, or if that's just a negative phrase connotation. But I have an itch to learn that Aristotle was born in Stygia in northern Greece in 384 BC. His father was Nicomachus. Was actually a physician at the court of Alexander the Great's father, Philip of Macedon. In 367, Aristotle moved to Athens, which at that time and for quite a while was actually the intellectual and cultural center of Greece. So he spent a lot of years studying with philosophers, scientists, and mathematicians at Plato's academy. But then, in the same year that Plato died, in 347 BC, Aristotle left the academy. There's speculation why he left, but it could have been because Plato didn't choose him directly as his successor, but it's more likely, however, that there was actually a lot of anti-Macedonian, a little cultural, what's the word I'm thinking of, where you're fearful and skeptical of other cultures. Huh. Dang. It's weird. It says I don't have internet right now. Why would that be? Huh. Well, luckily I have a website up with a lot of text. Xenophobia. Xenophobia, I think, is the word I'm thinking of. Anyways, just gonna randomly introduce this. I think that, yeah, there was anti-Macedonian sentiment, xenophobia. So Aristotle actually, because he was associated, obviously by birth, even with King Philip's court in Macedonia, he decided to get out of Dodge, and he traveled for the next 4 years throughout the eastern Aegean area, studying and teaching. I'm sure he had a lot to teach. During this time, he conducted a remarkable array of experiments and observations in the biological sciences. In 343, he was actually summoned back to Macedonia to be the personal tutor to young Alexander the Great. So there's been a lot of mythologization about the relationship between Aristotle and Alexander, but they actually said not much is known. So a couple years later, Aristotle returned to Athens. It was safe, mainly because Alexander the Great took over that shit. But in 334, he established his own philosophical school called the Lyceum. Adjust it so you guys can see me there. So, for about 11 years, he taught at the Lyceum. His lectures, they covered almost every area of study, actually, including physics, metaphysics, ethics, psychology, politics, and even a little bit of poetry. But in his pioneering work in logic and biology wasn't improved upon for 2,000 years. What? Yeah, I guess that makes sense. In 334, that would have been about 1670. Jesus. Yeah, I think it's fascinating, really, really fascinating to know that Aristotle was in fact, he was the greatest philosopher for about at least a solid 1,000 years. Probably 2,000 years, honestly. I know he was known as the philosopher. He had the title. So, when someone referred to the philosopher, that was Aristotle for pretty much 2,000 years. Wow, what a title. Okay, so he establishes the Lyceum in Athens, teaches, has his students write notes that apparently are the only writings of or the only transmitted knowledge of Aristotle's. I don't think any of his own books actually survived. And established a series of ideas about a series of subjects, some of which he literally originated the study of, that would last for 2,000 years. So this is probably the funniest part. After 11 years of his work in the Lyceum, 323 BC, Alexander the Great died and left Aristotle pretty much without a aegis or protection. Aristotle decided to leave Athens once again for fear of his life, but he alluded to the trial and execution of Socrates some 76 years earlier, and said, reportedly claimed that he didn't want the Athenians to sin a second time against philosophy, which was so very sardonically articulated by the past philosopher Rick Roderick, who I would recommend. I recommended in some of my early videos, which I've been doing this for almost 3 years now. It's hard to believe, but maybe if I can remember, I'll put a link, but if not, I would highly suggest you guys pause this video and go search Rick Roderick on YouTube. His philosophy lectures are pretty much what got me into philosophy. He is so just a very charismatic guy and very articulate, very knowledgeable, but understandable. He has philosophy videos on a lot of topics, but he did say that I tried to imitate him, in all honesty there. It was just so funny. He's like, Aristotle, of course, didn't want them to sin twice against philosophy, in his famous southern drawl of the West Texan accent. So, a year later, Aristotle dies in Chalcis in Euboea. I have no idea where that is. I would look it up, but my internet is apparently down. Pretty much all the works that have survived to the present day are those actually of his lecture notes from his courses at the Lyceum. And that these works were actually never intended for public consumption pretty much explains why they're generally dry and quite hard to follow. The Nicomachean Ethics was likely either edited by or dedicated to Aristotle's son Nicomachus. So, the historical context of Aristotle is that the Greek world that he was a part of and experienced was made up of small city-states, each of which had its own autonomous government, and the city-state consisted of slaves, non-citizen manual laborers, children, women, aliens, and citizens. So the citizens were adult males, most of whom had been born to citizen parents. So apparently most of the work done was by the slaves and laborers, and even women. So the citizens themselves actually had a lot of time on their hands. So they enjoyed one of the greatest periods of intellectual energy and prosperity in human history, ironically due to the fact that they were completely enslaving people to do their manual labor for them. But at that time, morality was Christian morality of brotherhood for everyone, was either very, very marginalized, to use a postmodernist term, or just didn't exist at all. So to have power over other people was a morality in itself. So that's why we could, from our perspective, say that's very ironic that they were trying to develop high philosophy and mathematics and generate great theories of politics, but as a direct result of having the leisure time created by slaves doing all their work for them. So that is it's actually very logical in the context, the historical context of their times, and that's why I'm very, very fascinated by putting things in context, because just there is an example of how you can call the Greeks evil people and accordingly, maybe logically, dismiss everything they created. But although they enslaved people, slavery itself was an institution that was very ubiquitous. I don't think it was regionalized at all. I think there were slaves pretty much everywhere in the world back then. So you couldn't, I don't think in a way, I think certainly you can't dismiss something. You can't dismiss the art and the grand architecture, architecture. There's a lot of very, very, very enduring artistic and philosophic and Pythagorean theorem, mathematic ideas and theories that were born out of this civilization that essentially is the incubator for our modern civilization. So I think we evolve as humans as long as we're able to, precisely because we have the foresight and ability to write things down relatively as they happened, and we can learn from that, from generation to generation. I think that's our largest virtue as a species, is being able to learn and empathize. So, departing from that tangent, Aristotle's students were young citizens whose tuition was meant to prepare them for a life of civic duty. There were few enough citizens that everyone in a given city would at least recognize, if not know, one another. And all citizens were expected to take part in public office. Unlike our modern system of representative democracy, where we simply elect officials to speak for us, all Greek citizens were expected to voice their own opinions in large deliberative and judicial assemblies, which to me is, I think, something that would instigate a need for personal development of our own ethics and morality, and to get away from those fancy kind of really disagreeable terms, honestly, just because they're so vague and highfalutin. I think it would create the desire in everyone to truly think through all their arguments and opinions and theories and philosophies, and not just how to live life, but even practical legal issues, so that maybe there might be a consensus of intelligent people. Because I think the having the social responsibility of being accountable for your own opinions is really probably one of the most powerful forces any human could be exposed to. And if we did have to deliberate and speak before a group of people, expressing our opinions and supporting them, arguing for them, I think that's probably the most potent form of a drive to learn. If you know that you're going to have to argue in front of all your local town for an opinion of yours, I think that would probably be the most. I don't think there's a reason that could really outweigh the importance of that one, to educate yourself about everything. So I think, in other words, it would lend itself, if it could be organized in a more local level. Obviously, we can't have 400 million Americans listening to 400 million other Americans one by one. On a small level, I think that would be it would give us the motivation to, rearrange our educational system in a way that fostered actual creative and critical thinking, not just rote memorization and training to become a good factory employee, like the modern educational system was designed to do. So, anyways, I think that's just a good idea. Where were we? I got lost again, guys. So, there was a strong bond of kinship created in citizenship as the same people lived together, governed together, and served in the army together, and perhaps most importantly, enjoyed leisure time together. The age of the city-state came to a close within Aristotle's lifetime, though, due to the efforts of his most famous pupil, Alexander the Great. Alexander came to power in the northern kingdom of Macedonia, and within a decade he had established one of the largest empires the world has ever seen. When Alexander died, Greece once more became fragmented, but the fierce independence of the city-states was a thing of the past. Greek culture was on the decline. It was decadent, and within a few hundred years it would be swallowed up by the burgeoning Roman Empire. Now, honestly, I always had a vague notion of the transition between the Greek Empire and the Roman Empire. And that's interesting that it's kind of a pivotal point. Alexander the Great seems to be for those. So, that was roughly the historical context in which Aristotle lived. The philosophical context is probably just as probably even more important. As the successor of Socrates and Plato, Aristotle was the last of the great Greek philosophers. Philosophy first flourished in Greece sometime in the early 6th century BC, as inquisitive thinkers began developing rational methods for investigating the mysteries of nature and mathematics. These pre-Socratic thinkers were as much scientists as mathematicians and philosophers. While there is significant pre-Socratic influence in Aristotle's work, primarily in the sciences and metaphysics, I'd say his most significant influence was undoubtedly Plato. And Plato lived from 427 to 347 BC. And Plato's philosophy was centered on his famous theory of forms, or theory of ideas. This theory is it's based on the observation that there must be some universal quality for all things classed under a single name they share in common. For instance, a flower is beautiful in a very different way from a human, but both the flower and the human must share something in common if we are to call them both beautiful. Plato's answer is that they share in common the form of beauty, which is itself invisible, eternal, unchanging. Anything that we perceive in this world is beautiful because it participates in some way in the form of beauty. So, Plato theorizes that our world of sensible experience, with its changes and disappointments, is but a poor reflection of the ideal world of pure forms that underlies our experience. The goal of philosophy, then, is to train the mind to see beyond the veil of experience and to contemplate the true reality of forms that lies beneath it. So while Aristotle he was definitely influenced by his master, teacher, Plato, the influence was in the negative, which seems to be a very frequent recurrence everywhere. I think the more you learn something, especially about someone in particular, it's like, I guess a better way would be that when you learn something, it's always interesting and perhaps easiest to think about its opposite. How do I? Well, I guess I think it's interesting to have a dichotomy, maybe, of a positive and a negative for everything. So when you learn about white, you can think, what would be the opposite of that? You learn about cold, and you think, what is warmth? And you learn about sickness, and you think, what is health? And I think it's a very useful way to learn. But going back to Plato, most of his works, including the Nicomachean Ethics, contain involved refutations of many of Plato's theories. Aristotle himself was an empirical scientist who felt that true wisdom comes from the examining of objects of experience and not from trying to look beyond them. In the Ethics, he primarily is critical of Plato's form of good. According to Aristotle, there is not a single form by virtue of which all good things are good. Instead, he discusses at length the multiplicity of the various virtues. In the Ethics, Aristotle's Ethics, it's deeply informed by his own work in the sciences and metaphysics, properly describing the breadth of Aristotle's impressive system would take a lot longer explanation here. But in terms of the impact on the Ethics, perhaps Aristotle's most significant concept is that of the teleology of nature. According to Aristotle, the nature works towards a teleos, or end goal. His biological work aims constantly at the question of what purpose different species or aspects of plants and animals serve. He classifies humans as rational animals. So our teleos in that sense would be ration. Reason, rationale. In other words, our function in life is to realize our full potential as rational beings. If we are not fully rational, then, according to Aristotle, we're falling short of our true nature. So this is essentially what drives the leitmotif or theme or direction of Aristotle's entire works, of the ethics at least. Our goal in life is to achieve our true nature, and this true nature consists of rationality. The purpose of a moral education, then, is to teach us how we may become perfectly rational and immune to the temptations of our lower animalistic parts. So ethics is just one of another number of fields that Aristotle classifies as practical science. Unlike the natural sciences, which examine the world around us, these sciences deal with the practical aspects of human society and how best to arrange society. Practical sciences they're all closely connected, and Aristotle frequently expounds on the connection between the good life for the individual and the kind of state that can make this good possible. Hence, Aristotle's Politics is an important companion and sequel to the Ethics. While the Nicomachean Ethics is Aristotle's most popular work on ethics, there's actually a second work called the Eudemian Ethics, which is far less widely read. Most scholars agree that the Eudemian Ethics was written earlier in Aristotle's career and represents a less mature view. A couple books from the Nicomachean Ethics are actually found in that work. So Aristotle's influence on Western philosophy is difficult to exaggerate. So his works, they were lost to the West for many centuries, but they were slowly transmitted back into Europe by Arab scholars during the Middle Ages, thanks mostly to the influence of St. Thomas Aquinas. Aristotelian philosophy became accepted almost as dogmatically as the Bible during the Middle Ages. While modern philosophy broke significantly from the scholastic traditions of the Middle Ages, Aristotle's influence remains undiminished. In particular, his emphasis on scientific reasoning and experimentation has been a cornerstone of modern empiricist philosophy. That was more of a biography, I would say, and more of a story about Aristotle than an analysis or even a short critique of his philosophy, but at least we got to put in context. My other video about the great souled man, I think it's really interesting that we look at Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle as essentially the biggest figures in philosophy, even today, and they lived, not coincidentally, I'm sure, in the lifetimes of each other, relatively. So it does make you wonder, even though, yes, they had slaves and the morality of the times were much different than our morality is. What was it that allowed these brilliant people to, what instigated them to come up with their ideas? And of course, Aristotle, essentially the greatest philosopher, was tutor to essentially the greatest conqueror, next to the greatest political leader, military commander, strategist, up there with Napoleon and Caesar. So it really does make, I think, it really does prompt the curiosity to delve further into classical Greece in general, to think all the other stuff, all the plays and all the other philosophers that existed. There's a lot of wealth to be gained there, and I think in the historical context, I don't think can be dismissed. The general intelligence, I bet, back then was probably greater, maybe I have a cynical view in that respect of the average human's mental capabilities, which, I don't know, I might not even be so far out of touch with as I think. But, some more kids floating by. I would hate to repeat the past, so I guess that's where I was going with that. I think there's probably a lot of superstitious naivete, given that they're literally 2,000 years before most of our modern scientific breakthroughs and understandings of nature. But still probably more sophisticated than a significant portion of humans today. But regardless of that, I think there was probably a greatness of soul about even the common man back then, just because of the hardships you had to go through. So I think there's wisdom to be gained by reading the greats. And with my book here, I'm getting closer and closer to that old literature. So maybe one of these days I'll actually open up a book written by Plato, or one of Aristotle's books, or Spinoza for that matter, and not just read a book about other books. So until then, I hope I get better soon enough, but I hope this wasn't a complete waste of time and my voice wasn't too unbearable. But certainly look forward to seeing another couple hundred episodes about this book. Just kidding. But maybe not. hope you guys enjoyed it, as always. And definitely, as always, I appreciate infinitely and am ridiculously inspired by all your thoughtful, kind, even critical comments of this channel. It's growing, and I'm always really trying to improve, even though I'm sick. But I have a couple war episodes, a couple other philosophy, specifically of dreams. I have an episode on Japan, the ancient history of Japan, coming up. So if you guys have any other ideas, or if it's been a while and I haven't acknowledged some of your ideas that you've suggested, it may just because I got caught up and I got a little too busy to remember, and I might have lost track of that idea. So please feel free to comment once again and let me know you're interested, which would, of course, be a nice call to action for me, because it would let me know that you really want it made. So, but I have a few in the works already, and I hope they'll be good. Honestly, I hope I continually, gradually improve to the point where I can be making these daily, even. That would be really cool for me. So, you guys, you always show your support, and it's always the warmest kind I see, and it doesn't go unacknowledged. I really do appreciate it. All those likes, comments, subscriptions in particular, and of course, those of you who support me on Patreon and through PayPal, and perhaps in the future when the transaction fees get low enough, Bitcoin. I love all you guys, and it inspires me to keep making these. So, with that, sleep well. Have a great sleep, and I'll see you next time. You guys are the best ever. You keep this channel alive.